Welcome, Lisa, to the Child Psych podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here today.
Oh, thanks, Tammy, for inviting me. Pleasure to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah, this conversation's been coming for actually quite a long time. It's been since I think last spring we talked about
I
this.
was about to say almost a year. It feels like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so it's just great we could finally get together to talk about everything play therapy and your model, and then we'll have a really cool little announcement at the end of this podcast. So
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to jump in. I just want to know a little bit about you. You know, we gave people your bio, but what is like really the flame that ignited your interest in play therapy?
Mm. Okay, so let's jump back in history. Okay, so when I was 9, my parents separated, and I went to a therapist. And the therapist, in my perception, had no idea what they were doing. And I remember sitting there as a 9-year-old in this like really big oversized chair,
Mhm.
talking, just having this conversation with this another adult. And I remember feeling this feeling of, why doesn't this person know how to connect with me?
Mm.
And it was so off putting to me, even as a 9-year-old, that I actually told myself, Lisa, tell this gentleman everything he needs to hear so that you don't ever have to come back again. And Tammy, I did. I got out of there with flying colors. But it didn't actually mean I resolved anything, obviously, right? I still needed support. There was a reason why my parents wanted me to go get some support in the first place. So fast forward a couple years, I'm now like 12 years old, and it's clear Lisa needs some support again. And so they sent me to someone else who was a little bit better. I'm not going to say a lot better, but I'm going to say a little bit better. And I left with this feeling of, how come these two individuals didn't know how to connect with me as a kid? Because I wanted to be connected to, and I wanted the support, but I also didn't want to put the time and energy into someone who I perceived didn't know what they were doing with me. If that makes any sense from a kid's perspective.
Well, you and I have a very similar start. Same thing.
Wow.
Parents divorced, high conflict divorced, 4 psychologists, and they all
Uh-huh.
were horrible. All of them.
Yeah.
They were horrible. And it wasn't until I was a teenager, about 17, that I found a really good therapist. And then when I, learned more and became a therapist, I started seeking out certain types of therapy. But so my stuff wasn't resolved till I was in my mid 20s by the time I figured it out.
Yeah, it was exactly. So that was really the journey. Went to graduate school, obviously, to be a counselor, but even then I didn't really have kids on my radar. I had teenagers on my radar. I was really interested and curious about the teens, particularly the ones that were really acting out. I really loved the teens that were, seemingly off the deep end. And I don't know, the soft spot in my heart for those teens. And then I started my journey in graduate school, and I had to do an internship, as many therapists and clinicians do. And I was in my internship told that I was going to work with little kids. I initially had a
Surprise.
me,
Yes, I was.
but no, I don't want to work with young kids. And I had my first session with a 9-year-old little boy whose parents had just gotten divorced, because you can't make that stuff up, and there's perfection in it, in my opinion. And I loved it. I fell in love in my first session, shifted my thinking, and went all in with kids. Still love working with teenagers, but went all in with the kids, and that's how I got into it, Tammy.
Yeah, I know, and that I have a very similar story. And mine was with an 8-year-old boy with attention deficit. I was hired, had no experience working with kids, with the exception of being a teacher before I became a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just remember having an aha moment, being like, oh, this is what made me a good teacher, makes me a good therapist for kids, and my own journey in mental health. And it clicked. I was like, I am not supposed to be doing marriage counseling. I am supposed to be doing work with kids. So I switched from
Mm-hmm.
marriage therapy into working with kids.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
on our podcast, we have quite a variety of people listen to this podcast. I really wish we had a single audience, but we have a lot of professionals and then a lot of parents and caregivers.
Mhm.
So we had an episode, I don't know, a couple months ago where Tanya and I talked about the power of play. So if anybody's listening, it might be a good precursor to go back and listen to that episode before diving into this one.
Yeah.
But we talked about how it cultivates so many positive mental health outcomes, resiliency, and can, help combat, a lot of negative, things that go on in a child's life. But what we're talking about today is play therapy. So we take it a step further, and this is your clinical specialty as the founder of Synergetic Play Therapy.
Mhm.
How can you explain to our audience how this is used
Mhm.
therapeutically? How play? Because it's not as simple as just parents playing with their kids on the floor. Well, that can have therapeutic benefits. This has a different quality to it.
It does, yes. So, one of the ways I like to think about play is a language in and of itself, but it's more of a right brain language. And so, when we think about brain development in a child and we think about their ability to cognitively and then verbally express complex processes, that's that's a long time in development. And so the idea of sitting down with a 5-year-old and having a very complex conversation about a trauma that they may not even have full memory of because it's more embedded in their system from even before the time that memory formation came in an explicit way. um, that's really complicated. And what I love about play is that what the child is not able to say cognitively through words, they can express it all through play, even the things that they're not consciously aware of, even the experiences that aren't necessarily right there in their cognitive thought process. They're more like stored in their body. It all can come out in play. So children are masterful. They are, we can say that they are fluent in play as their primary language. And so, in my opinion, if we're working with young children and we're asking them to use a language that's not their primary language, there's a little bit of a disconnect happening because it's where children naturally communicate, which I think is really important because a lot of people still believe that play is this like frivolous activity. Oh, they're just having fun. Oh, it's kind of a thing you do in your free time, in your spare time. And it's not that at all. Children are constantly recreating stories and recreating their inner world and bringing to life situations and trying to figure themselves out and the world out through the play, even if they're just seemingly sitting in a corner doing whatever, like they're still processing something that's quite meaningful. So when we take that and then we bring it into a therapy space, and then we have someone that is educated in play and educated in how to make play therapeutic, now we have the ability to focus the play into the really hard places. And we have the ability to help bring a deeper level of understanding and then integration about what the child is attempting to process on their own. So it's kind of like taking this natural process and then putting a helper alongside that's then able to make meaning of this really instinctual process that happens inside of children. And again, they
Yeah.
can say everything that they can speak fluently, you know.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It is their language. And I think kids are so right brained. And so much of what they experience is kinesthetic and somatic. And it's not left brained. And adults tend to be so left brained. That's why they often seek out things like dialectical behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. And that is the wrong language. Kids aren't processing information that way. They are processing symbolically.
Exactly.
And one of the things I always tell parents, because we both are registered play therapists, is that play is literally a language we can code as play
Mhm.
therapists. Like you, not maybe the first session, but you spend 4 or 5 sessions with the child. It is literally a language. There's
Mhm.
these, whether it's lining toys up or battling and good or a bad guy play or death play, it all has very significant meaning if it's played over and over again.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, beautiful. Mhm.
Yeah. So now you're a registered play therapist, as am I. I'm prescriptive. We won't get into that.
Mhm.
Your modality is unique in that you came up with synergetic play therapy.
Mhm.
So, can you tell us a little bit about how your model might differ from other models of play therapy? What's unique
Sure.
about your approach?
Yeah. So for the play therapists that are listening, I think a little bit of my background, how to get there, is a little bit helpful because it didn't come out of nowhere. So I was originally trained as a child centered play therapist, and then I went on and did training in experiential play therapy. I'm also a certified Gestalt therapist. I also have a pretty extensive background in various mindfulness and somatic practices. So you take all of that and those influences, and you can see them and you can feel them in synergetic play therapy. So, the roots are deep in other thinking and other modalities. The piece that synergetic play therapy focuses on, there's a couple key pieces. One is not just the story, or not just the experience that the child is trying to process or integrate, like what they went through. We're also working at another layer, which is the activation in their autonomic nervous system. So recognizing that when a child goes through something that's challenging, there lands an imprint into the body, right? There lands behavioral patterns into the body. So maybe the child learns how to fight, or they learn how to shut down, or they learn how to dissociate, or they learn how to contract, or they learn how to, whatever it is. But the body holds the imprint of what was needed to be done when the hard thing was happening in order to survive, if that makes sense. And so in the play space, as the child is playing through and working through the thoughts, the memories, their body's also having that imprint come to life in the room. So in synergetic play therapy, we're also working with the imprint. So we're trying to not only help them integrate their perceptions into a working narrative where they are able to make meaning of what happened in their life, but we're also working on shifting the imprints in their body so that their physiology actually also changes also. So we talk a lot about repatterning the patterns of activation of the nervous system. So that's a big focus that is a little different than other models, because it's a direct and primary focus in synergetic play therapy.
Okay.
The other piece that I think is a little bit unique is that we view the key role of the therapist as the external regulator. And we really look at that very closely and deeply. Like, what is happening inside of the clinician as they're facilitating what's going on? How do they make sense of that experience? How do they use that information? What does co-regulation even mean or look like from that place? So as much as we're curious about the child's patterns, we're equally curious about the therapist patterns, and we're curious about the development and the transformation inside the therapist as well, recognizing that the therapist's ability to be able to be with, to help integrate, to co-regulate is one of the primary elements in being able to heal trauma and to create a certain level of safety so that the child feels like they can go towards the really hard stuff. It feels like they've got someone that can really go there with them. And so we spend a lot of time. The way I like to think of it is we learn about what's happening inside of the child, we learn about what's happening inside of the therapist, but my favorite part is we learn about what's happening in between. So
Mm.
synergetic play therapy is the in between space. What's
The
that? What's there? And what needs to be cultivated in that space so that both child and therapist are, in a sense, healing together, if you will, right? There's really a dance that's happening between them. So I think those are some elements that make it unique. There's obviously our specific ways, the way we think about the therapeutic stages, the way we think about boundary setting, the way we think about how we would go about conducting a session. I mean, there's its own unique elements of that. But as far as this overall theory of what does it really take to become an external regulator to support the child in trauma integration is one of the really big questions. And then fundamentally, the next part of it is recognizing that healing occurs when there is a moment where the child is able to connect inward with themselves. And so in synergetic play therapy, we call it a moment of attaching to themselves. So a moment of connecting in. I like to think of it as a moment of coming home. And so these moments of what does that look like? What does it take to help children develop a sense of inner home? And what does it take to help them continue to develop an orientation towards that? So we're building resiliency along the way, and we're also increasing the capacity for integration along the way.
Beautiful. Can you explain to our audience what you mean by first co-regulation? Because not everyone, we're just going to, we've talked about it on the show, but we're just going to revisit it quick.
Yeah.
And then this process of being an external regulator, I guess there's a bridge there because we talk about co-regulation and then being an external regulator, which I don't know how
Yeah.
much of a difference there is there, but
Yeah. So I think a way to say it simply is that, so whether the listener right now is a parent or a clinician or whatever hat, to recognize that when a child, or any of us really, but I'll go with a child, when a child is under stress, or they're working through something that they're perceiving as challenging, so that could be going into a hard memory or a hard thought or something like that. In a sense, they are looking around asking, can I borrow your nervous system? They're like, who's got a nervous system that I can borrow so that I can go into this in a way where I don't feel so overwhelmed by my experience that I'm going to lose myself. So children attempt to borrow the nervous system. And when I say nervous system, what I more specifically mean is they're attempting to borrow the part within us that's able to stay steady in activation. It's not necessarily about being calm. It's about being steady, right? A part of us that's a bit poised, it's a bit more grounded in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of heightened activation, heightened intensity. Because when they're able to feel that inside of us as adults, that's actually what creates the sense of safety, because it's like they had the feeling of someone's got this. Okay, someone's not going to let us completely spill over the edge, emotionally, right? Like someone's got this. And it's really a feeling. And that creates enough safety there for the child then to begin to turn inwards, which is where they need to go for integration. So when we talk about co-regulation, that's essentially what we're talking about, is when the child is struggling, what needs to happen inside the adult so the adult can access that place inside where they are a bit more grounded, so that the child can then borrow their nervous system and then co-regulate, which is really describing a beautiful shared, we call it like a resonance experience, a shared energetic experience, because it's really felt sense. It's kind of interesting, Tammy, to put left brain concept around a right brain.
we're integrating. We're
Right?
integrating. That's
Do
what we're doing
you know
right
what I
now.
mean? Exactly, right? And so co-regulation really describes the attunement between the adult and the child as they're leaning in or moving towards the uncomfortable thing in a way where there's enough safety where it doesn't start to feel so big that the child can't integrate it. That'd be kind of the way I would talk about
Yeah.
that.
And I think it's important for people to understand kids come into the playroom and they do what we would call, or I would call, an enactment. So it might seem very benign, or it can be very obvious that a child is, maybe they could be building a Lego tower, they might be doing a sword fight with you, they might be playing in the sand and making like a scene. But what they're doing is recreating an experience within the room that they have experienced in the outside world symbolically. So all of those feelings in their nervous system are coming up. They've been reactivated. So whether it's trauma, whether it's just some mild anxiety, some, depressive states, something is coming up for them, that therapist then is saying, here's my nervous system. I'm calm and grounded, so you can feel safe enough to explore this further. We can battle more, you can build higher. There might be some bathing a baby or feeding something, and it allows them to go deeper into that play narrative. With that,
Yeah.
would think that explains it for parents when they see it, because the kids are doing all these things. They're doing
Yeah.
art, they're doing battles or death play, or like all these different things. And kids tend to, if a therapist is not present and able to co-regulate them, the play gets very stuck,
Mm-hmm.
in my experience,
Mm-hmm.
or you miss the child, and
Mm-hmm.
then they'll stop playing. They want to go. It just doesn't go where it needs to. It just stays very stagnant.
The other place that I will put in here, because I think this is helpful for parents, is that in addition to staying stuck, it often will escalate. So sometimes the reason why a child's behavior is escalating, or their whatever happened is escalating, is because there isn't that sense of someone is right there helping modulate the intensity. And so the escalation happens almost like a cry for, like, someone show up. I need to feel someone right now because I'm not connected to myself. And I'm not connected to myself. So I need to feel you, because I'm losing myself right now. And so we actually see children amp up the play, and we see kids amp up their behaviors with therapists and even with parents until they feel the presence of the adult show up, which then helps them come back into themselves.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So much of actually, I'm gonna skip that part. We'll get someone to edit that part out. Let's just walk before we do kind of go to our last question here. Can you walk our audience through what kind of the process is for starting play therapy? What, how long does it take? Is it just like they walk into a room and there's a bunch of toys? Like, or maybe there's a parent listening who wants to get their child into play therapy, but they're like, I don't quite understand what that even looks like.
Yeah. So I will say that every model has its own way of going about it. And so I'll try to speak kind of generally. Um, there's many different approaches also. So that's another piece for parents to understand, that getting curious about your therapist's approach. Those are really important questions. How do you think about this? What do you do? What is the process like? How will I be involved? How does this work? I really encourage parents to ask those really hard questions, because it's important for a therapist, for a parent to resonate with the therapist and to resonate with the style of treatment and all of that, because this isn't just we're working with the kid, we're really working with the whole family. If a child's struggling, the family's struggling. And so the whole system really needs support. So parents need to feel comfortable with whoever it is that they're working with. I would say that a very typical way of going about play therapy is a session a week. However, just because it's typical doesn't mean that's the way that it has to go. My preferred way of working with families, Tammy, is in an intensive style. So what does that look like? So I like to work with children in 2-week increments where I see them twice a day. So I see them twice a day for 5 days, and then we have the weekend off, and then I see them twice a day again for the next week. And it is amazing the depth and the progress we make, because everyone's all in. This is what we are doing for these 2 weeks. And it's a combination of sessions with the child. Sometimes it's sessions with the parent and the child. Sometimes it's family. Sometimes it's me and the parent. And it's really supporting whatever needs to be supported based on, whatever the challenge is. I also, in addition to that, I think that there's also a flow that I think can be taken into account. So there is a process that children go through. Most modalities have a way to chart or to track, progress, and to track sort of phases of treatment, if you will. And so, I know therapists where they might start in the one a week, and then things get really challenging, and then they up it to, you know what, let's do an hour and a half session, and not just so we'll kind of do two to try to, you know, move it along a little bit more. Or maybe they condense it down in a couple weeks, it's a little bit more frequent, back to. So hopefully, as I'm saying this, what I really want parents to hear is there's actually room for creativity, and there's actually room to co-create with a therapist what treatment could look like, or what would be best for your needs, for your kids' needs, you know, scheduling and all of that. Um, Again, based on different models, many play therapy models, it's usually just the child and the therapist that are in the room. However, it's not always that. You know, sometimes parents are asked to be part of the process. Sometimes the child wants the parent to be part of the process. Sometimes it's a family session. So again, those are questions that can be co-created, or different ways that can be co-created with the therapist around treatment. Typically, there's some kind of a check-in with the caregivers. So some modalities you check in right after the session, either in person or later on the phone. Other modalities, maybe you have a couple sessions where you don't check in, and then you meet for a full hour check-in. There's so many ways to go about it. I think for me, from my perspective, the question is, what does the child need? You know, what does the child need? What does the family need? And how do we best create that treatment plan, if you will, to support whatever is coming up for this particular. I'm very much a believer that every child, every family is unique. And therefore, every child and family needs to be looked at in a unique lens, because everyone's needs are slightly different. So if that feels relevant to the parents that are listening, you get to ask for that. You know, you get to ask for that. You get to ask questions. You get to be a part of the, you know, of the conversation. I don't know if you want
Yeah.
to add anything to that,
Yeah,
Tammy.
I would say before you go look for a therapist, a play therapist, to make sure they actually are trained as a play therapist, because
There's
there's
that.
many,
Yes.
many therapists who have a license. They're a licensed practical counselor, or an LMFT, or a psychologist, or licensed clinical social worker, and they say they do play therapy, and they do talk therapy with toys on the floor.
Mhm.
And I would always say to make sure that whoever is working with your child has accredited training from the Association for Play Therapy, or for the International Association for Play Therapy, or the Canadian Association for Play Therapy. I think those are the three main ones. I may
Mhm.
have missed one.
Mhm.
Because that's really important. Those people would have gone through substantial supervision and training. It is not as simple as having toys on the floor.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing parents might want to know is, what kind of things would they find in your office? Like, I can share what's in mine, but I'm like, you tell me what's in yours. What kind
Yeah.
of toys, what kind of things, what would that look
I
like?
almost want to say, what wouldn't you find in my office? um, all kinds of things. Everything from uh, miniatures, which are, basically little toy figurines, if you will, to puppets, to art, I have music instruments, I have dress up clothes. I also have sand trays in my office. A lot of kids like to process using sand. And so basically like a mini sandbox, if a parent doesn't know what a sand tray looks like. And I have ones that are just dry sand, but I also have ones that are wet, which means you can pour water into it, and you can use it's called a wet tray in the world of play therapy. Um, so many things, many ways for the child to gravitate towards something meaningful to help them go into their process. And so, I mean, really, it's kind of like, what isn't in my what isn't in
Yeah.
my room?
I think parents always get, when I do trainings, or they would come in when I do an intake, I always would show the parents in advance what the rooms would look like, because
Yep.
my office was separate from my playroom. And they were always a little off put that I would have weapons in my room. I had, like feces, like not real feces, but like play feces, and blood, and like handcuffs. And this was so important to that process because there is a lot of trauma or there's aggressive impulses they're showing. And I
Yep.
always tell parents, like, don't stress. Just because your kids are playing with these things doesn't make them a sociopath. It's
Yeah.
big breath. It's just a way for them to express a lot of hard things that are going on inside of them. So I always like want to preemptively say that because it surprises a lot of parents actually.
It does. And I would even add to that, as you know, that aggression piece is one of the areas that I love to focus on in training and working with play therapists. And so I think it's actually really important that there are things in the room that can be used to explore those aggressive impulses and urges. And I know that sometimes parents are really hesitant, and the thinking is if they do that in there, then that means that they're going to do it out here. But the reality is that they're probably already doing it out there, which is why then they need to do it in here. Because if we're not going to work with it, I mean, what I'll often say to parents is I actually need them to bring it into the room. I need them to bring the aggression into the room. I need them to bring those whatever the behaviors are, because if they don't, how are we going to integrate them? How are we going to work with it? How are we going to understand them and explore them? And so this is a safe place. It's a contained place for the aggression to come in, not so that we promote it, but so that we can integrate it. And I find that to be a useful thinking to help with
Yeah,
parents.
I tell parents, I said, the more they do it in here, the less they're going to do it out there. So we're
Exactly.
giving them the space to explore that darker side of themselves
Mhm.
or of what the family, whatever's going on that they're
Mhm.
projecting into the room in a contained way. And so what I see is kids who are aggressive and then they do the aggressive play, or if there's just a, impulsivity or something, all of a sudden they're not doing that with their brother anymore. They're not doing that at school anymore. So yeah, like it's we have to practice that mastery, containment, integration first in the play, and then kids are ready to handle it in the real world. Play
Totally.
is that set. Like it's what we do, it's a dress rehearsal for life.
Yeah.
So they need the dress rehearsal if they're going to
They
handle things in
absolutely
life.
do. Another piece that I think is important for play therapists and for parents to consider is that it's actually not the toys really that matter. It's not about the toys. It's about the feelings that come up as a result of how they're using the toys. So, an example that I will give parents, for example, is let's say that their child is processing anxiety at night, right? Like they're having a hard time going to sleep at night. Nighttime feels like a scary time. So if they're trying to bring to life the anxiety or the fear in the room, there's so many ways that they could go about this. They could literally play out, we're going to sleep and the lights are off and we hear a scary noise and then there's the anxiety. Okay, maybe that's one way. But we could also bring out the puppets, and we could have one puppet that is trying to scare the other puppet in some way, and there's no sense of night. There's no sense of sleep. It's just the feeling of, oh my gosh, something scary is about to happen. Or the kid could just pick up a pen and for a moment pretend to like they're going to throw the pen at the therapist, where the therapist has a moment of, oh my gosh, I just got scared, something might happen. So it doesn't matter what the toys are fundamentally. It's useful to have a variety because children will use that to bring to life their stories. But what we're really working with is the felt sense that's emerging. We're working with the emotions, we're working with what's happening in the body. And kids are brilliant. Kids can bring that to life in so many ways. So I tell parents that too of, when we meet, telling you the details of what we played isn't that's not really the point. Like it's not actually going to answer the question that wants to be asked. But what is more important is I want to share with you your child's perception of themselves, or their perception of what happened, or the feelings that they're struggling with, or how they're trying to cope with that, or how they're relating to that. Because that's the important piece, not necessarily the toys that they used to bring all that to life.
Beautiful. Yeah. And I know therapists can get really stuck on like, do I have the right toys and
Yeah.
do I have enough figurines? And I'm always just like, you are, what do you say? There's a quote on your website that says like the therapist is
The
essentially
most
the main
the most
tool. They're
important
the
toy in
most
the
important
playroom.
toy. What, say
Yep.
that again?
Yeah, the therapist is the most important toy in the playroom.
Absolutely. And it's that interaction and that dance, which brings me to my next kind of question.
Yeah.
In your approach to play therapy, it aims to replicate the dance of attachment. So, meaning like it's similar to what happens between the parent and child. You are now kind of taking a similar, attachment relationship, and you're you're giving them that right hemisphere co-regulation kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Um how do you take that? So you're working with a parent,
Mm-hmm.
or sorry, you're working with a child,
Mm-hmm.
and you're kind of a surrogate attachment figure in that moment to help them feel safe, that, neuroception of safety. I feel like I can explore and I feel good. But then they go home with the parent,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe that's not their experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we, how could parents apply your philosophy so they're doing this co regulation experience, what you're doing in the room with the child?
Yeah.
What can we give them?
Yeah. I'll give a little, aside from a full day training.
I know. We have
Like,
5 minutes, Lisa. Let's.
so what I will say is that the key piece of that is the attunement. That's the most important part of the whole process, because it's the attunement that allows for the child to feel attached to themselves and to feel the safety right in the relationship. And so um probably, if we're going to just get like really really practical here, it's recognizing, actually let's just take an experience. Let's say parent is standing in the kitchen. I don't know, they're cooking some food. Child's at the kitchen table. Parent puts the food down on the kitchen table, and kid's like, "I don't like that," or whatever, right? And so there's now this activation, or whatever. The child starts to, I don't know, the food's touching or whatever it is, right? So they're activated. They're starting to go into a meltdown mode. The first piece that's important for parents to recognize is that they're affected by that, because the natural normal instinct is try to get them to stop. That's the natural instinct. Oh my gosh, they're freaking out. How do I get them to calm down? But what we have to recognize is that the urge to calm the child down has very little to do with the child, very little to do with the child, and has almost everything to do with, in the moment when that happened, that got really uncomfortable inside of the parent. And the parent didn't know what to do with themselves in that uncomfortable state. So that's actually where the work is. So parents, the first step is notice. Notice that it just got hard. Notice that you're anxious. Notice that you just got scared. Notice the urge in you to contract. Notice the urge to control. But notice, because in that place of noticing, it creates a moment of a pause, and it moves us into a moment of curiosity, which moves us into a completely different part of our brain, which allows us then to respond instead of react. Because the just trying to make it stop is an instinctual, natural, normal urge, because we feel scared. But when we're going to become a co-regulator, we need to be in a different part of our brain. So I like to think of it like this. So in the moment, we ask ourselves, okay, how am I doing? Right? So, okay, how am I doing? And then in the next moment, what do I need? So maybe I need a breath. Maybe I need to move my body. Maybe I need to just say out loud, oh my gosh, I just got overwhelmed. Whew, this is a lot. But so what do I need? And then from there, what can I begin to do to myself first? I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings in co-regulation with kids, is that the parent has to get themselves sorted first. You can't co-regulate another human being unless you are connected to yourself first. And there's so much parenting advice out there that's about, what do you do to the kid when? And all of it's brilliant. But there's a step before implementing any of that, which is how do I grab hold of myself so I don't get lost right now in this moment as my kid is freaking out, having this meltdown right here at the kitchen table. So I think that's the piece that I would just sort of say, let's just practice and get curious. Just as a preliminary step is, can you create a pause of curiosity? Can you notice you're activated? And before you fly into shift it mode or try to make it better mode, is there something that you can offer yourself so that you're a little bit more grounded? Because I guarantee when you're a bit more grounded, you'll have more insight into what would be helpful in the moment. Maybe what's helpful is do nothing. Just sort of, wow, that's a big response.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You didn't like that.
You didn't like
You
that.
just
Yeah. Maybe what's helpful is all of a sudden having the peas talk to the carrots and creating a little fun moment in there of the peas, like, oh my gosh, I don't like touching, who knows, right? Parenting is so creative. Maybe it's literally going over there and separating out the peas and the carrots and going, oh my gosh, I know this about you, and I'm so sorry that I put them on your plate in a way that's challenging for you. Here, let me separate them out because I know that feels really good in your body, when they're separated out. Who knows, right? But the point is we can't even get into that place of creativity if we're not in our prefrontal cortex first.
Yeah, I think parents have to remember, if you think of it like as a plane going through turbulence, right? Like
Mhm,
turbulence is going to be there. But at the
mhm,
end of the day, you want that pilot to come on and be
mhm,
calm and collected and be like, hey, folks, like, we're just going to put on your seatbelt. I'm flying the plane. I've got it. But you're going to notice it's going to get a little bumpy. Like, you want to hear that calm, clear, steady voice. And parents, in order to be the pilot flying that plane through turbulence, like she's saying, you need to connect to yourself, take a breath, walk away for a second, come back, tag in your partner if you need to, whatever, take a cool sip of water, whatever that is. But you've got to come back to be that pilot. And so
exactly.
that child will relax into that energy of that, like, calm, consistent, firm energy, that grounded energy that Lisa was talking about that exists in the play therapy.
Mhm,
Because it's not that we don't notice the anger. Because when my son gets frustrated or my daughter gets frustrated, I'm not happy smiling at them. I'll say, like, oh, you're really frustrated with me right now. Now,
mhm,
the tone reflects the frustration. I feel it. I'm probably
mhm,
feeling a little frustrated too, but I'm breathing into that
mhm,
and I'm mirroring that back to them.
mhm,
But I'm not yelling when I'm saying it. So it's
mhm,
like I meet you with,
mhm.
here's the emotion. I'm kind of reflecting that back,
Yep.
but I'm also keeping level with it. And
Mhm,
I'm not letting it get to a 10. I'm maybe going to
mhm.
keep it here at a 4, a 3 or a 4. But I do see your frustration and I can feel that.
Yeah.
And it's okay for you to feel that. That's fine.
Mhm. The number one thing that a dysregulated child needs, in my opinion, is a connected adult.
Yeah.
That's it. And so that's it. Like, that's an easy task. That's it, everybody. Done. Oh my gosh, right? Let's just name that and normalize that. Tammy, what you and I are talking about right now is hard. It's not
Yeah.
easy. It's hard. I'm a big fan of the bar being human. I think that's a pretty good bar for all of us to strive towards, which means that we're going to go in and out of attunement. We're going to go in and out of being able to co-regulate well. We're going to have lots of ruptures in our relationships. How do we go back and do repairs? But with this higher aim of, and how do I connect myself? And how do I connect to my child? And how do I connect? And how do I connect? And when I lose myself, how do I connect? And that is the overarching sort of what we're striving towards. But again, recognizing no one's going to pull that off flawlessly. Um,
No, lots of practice.
Lots of
Lots of
practice.
practice. Yeah.
Yeah.
And kids just want to know you can handle their feelings. They just want to know that there's nothing wrong with them for having their feelings, that they're still seen and still heard, and they're not broken or deficient in some way. We all want to feel like that when we're having a horrible moment. We just want our spouse or our friend to say, like, I can see you're having a hard day. Like, you're human. Like,
Mhm,
you're allowed to have hard days.
mhm,
So that's really important. And that's what often what therapists are quite good at, but we're so removed. We're very objective. Like, we are
mhm,
not personally invested in the way a parent is with their child. So it's a
mhm.
lot easier for a therapist to do that than a parent. Right.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, I think that's part of the wisdom of I'm a mom, and my child's been through multiple rounds of play therapy at different points in her life because life happens. And because I'm not objective as her mother, which is right, I would call myself a play therapy expert, and I'm not going to facilitate the process with my kid. I'm going to take my kid to other support because the play therapist is going to help me see things about myself that I can't see because I'm too close to it. She's going to help he is going to help my daughter, work through whatever it is. Because what if I'm part of the contribution to what's going on? And so I think that that's also really important, especially for any play therapists that are listening who are also parents. It's okay to take your own kids to play therapy.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean that you're a bad play therapist. It doesn't mean that you are, deficient in your skills in some way. We all need people that can see things that we can't, because the mirror's too close.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, on that note, Lisa, I really want to make this announcement. So many of you know that the Institute offers courses and conferences and trainings, and we loved Lisa's work because so many therapists in Canada take her training. It was very, very popular. So I started looking into Lisa's work. I started listening to her podcast, Beyond. Hold on, your podcast. I just
Lessons from the
Beyond
playroom.
Lessons from the Playroom. I was just on it the other day. I should
Mhm.
know that. And I really wanted to promote what she was doing. And we do a lot of collaboration with other clinicians and authors. And so for the last almost year, we've been in talks with her organization, Synergy Play Therapy. And so we are going to be offering Lisa's courses. I have 6 of them. We're actually launching. By the time you listen to this, 6 of her courses will have been launched. There'll be a link in the comments or in the description of this podcast episode so you can take a look. But they will also be part of our new professional subscription model. So if you are a therapist or a clinical social worker, a counselor, you can take some of mine and Tanya's play therapy courses, some of Lisa's courses, and pay it quarterly or annually. So it makes it more affordable for people, especially in maybe they're in a nonprofit sector or they're a student doing their master's or PhD and money's a little tight. And these are all accredited with the Association for Play Therapy. Myself and Tanya and Lisa, we are registered play therapists, and I think you're an RPTS, so am I.
Mhm.
And so we're so grateful your team was willing to come on board. We know we have a lot of courses with you. You're still recording. We have 6 now, but we have more coming out.
Mhm.
So it's just such an honor. And we're just so excited to announce this because as far as we know, there is no subscription model for professional training that makes it affordable, especially for our students or people first entering the field or
Mhm.
those who just want to get interested in the field and want to learn more about it.
Yeah. Well, we are super honored that you approached us and asked us to collaborate, and truly so grateful and honored that we can take some of our courses and hand them your way so that you can help play therapists have access to training. It's huge.
Yeah, and we also recommend, of course, you can do online trainings, but in my opinion, training is best in person, especially for play therapy. So we offer it, especially for people who live in isolated areas or accessibility is difficult, money is difficult. But we'll also have a link to Synergetic Play Therapy's training schedule, so you can go do a training with Lisa, hopefully, or one of her team in person. Even if you you want to become a registered play therapist, so many of those hours have to be in person. They have to be contact trainings. So we
Mhm.
will also include a link to your organization so people can take a look at any trainings you guys are offering over the next while.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for this meeting today, Lisa. It was just such a privilege to get to finally connect with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Likewise.